Desculpa a interrupção do meio tempo, mas só passei rapidinho pra te lembrar que Conmebol Copa América 2024 e a UEFA Euro 2024 já estão disponíveis no EA Sports FC Mobile. Não perca tempo, vem participar desses eventos e vivenciar o melhor do futebol. Viva a emoção do verdadeiro futebol e escreva um novo capítulo nas histórias dos seus jogadores favoritos e todos os times participantes. EA Sports FC Mobile, o jogo de todo mundo no seu bolso. Participe e joga agora. Inclui compras opcionais dentro do jogo, inclui itens aleatórios.
All-star closer Kenley Jansen, we have a question.
What's the best podcast of all time? Baseball isn't boring, baby.
I'm Rob Bradford, and every single day I'm sitting down with the biggest names to show you this great game is the greatest game. It's my podcast. It's my passion. It's a cause I started more than 2 years ago and is now the most prolific national daily baseball pod there is. Another fact, so jump aboard the BIB Express. Follow and listen to Baseball Isn't Boring, presented by Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage on the free Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
It's time. Time to get in the zone. Time to get in the zone with the 49ers Webzone. This is the No Huddle Podcast with Al and Brian.
What's up, faithful? This is Al Sacco with you, one half of the 49ers Webzone. No Huddle Podcast. It's a holiday week. July 4th is coming up. Football is right around the corner. We're only a few weeks away now from training camp, and we're really about to start ramping up things with the 49ers in the NFL. But for this week, being a holiday week, we thought we'd put together best of show for you guys. So I went back and I picked 4 clips that I thought maybe people hadn't heard in a while that were really cool interviews that we had that I wanted to share again with the fans. The first is Mike Silver. This was back in 2017 when he was still with NFL Network, and before NFL Network, before Sports Illustrated, Mike had covered the Niners. He was a beat writer. And he told us a great story about Joe Montana and Steve Young and some behind-the-scenes stuff about that competition and the awkwardness that was there that I thought fans would dig. It was really cool to hear Mike tell that story and kind of get a glimpse of what it was like back then. And my God, if they had social media at that time, what the quarterback controversy would have turned into, it would have been crazy.
I know you've been around Bay Area sports for a while, and you were with the Press Democrat before you went to Sports Illustrated, and you were covering the Niners when they made that transition from Joe Montana to Steve Young. What do you remember about that transition and the feelings sort of around the organization and amongst the fans as they went from one legend to another, but it wasn't necessarily a smooth deal?
Well, I mean, it was a crazy thing, and I laugh sometimes when people now, on social media or in the public discourse will comment on a potentially awkward situation, like, oh, what if Roger Goodell had to hand the Lombardi trophy to Tom Brady, or, oh, this is going to be awkward, these 2 former teammates. And I'm thinking, you have no idea what went down. And, Steve Young told me a really great story, which was that he was talking to Aaron Rodgers one day in Green Bay, and Aaron was talking about winning MVP, and I think in the 2011 season, and he said something like and he was going through it, and he said, "Hey, let me ask you a question. When you were doing all this, where was Brett?" And Aaron was like, "Huh?" And he's like, "Yeah, where was Brett when you were winning MVP?" And he said, "Well, I guess he was home in Hattiesburg at that point because, he had finally retired." And Steve said, "Yeah, Joe was standing on the sidelines while I was winning MVP." Imagine that. And, it was not an orthodox situation. So, for people who don't know the story well, Bill Walsh traded for Steve Young, who had been a huge prospect but had gone to the USFL and now ends up in the NFL with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who at the time were absolutely atrocious. Steve once got a kick out of one of my lines, which was, I said, back when he was the quarterback of the Buccaneers, it was like leading ABBA into a battle of the bands, against Pearl Jam and the Stones. So it was, it was a weird time, and Bill Walsh went and got Steve Young, and that coincided, it turned out, with a period where Joe had a serious back injury and suffered some playoff losses, and one of them in '87 with the Niners as home favorite and a number one seed, getting beaten by the Vikings. Steve Young came in late and made some stuff happen. So it was a very weird backdrop. And in '88, they were Bill Walsh was kind of throwing Steve in for some games and saying Joe was fatigued, and Joe ended up leading them on a run when they hit the brink at 6-5 late in the season, winning a third Super Bowl and then having a monster season in '89 and winning the fourth. But then after they lost the 1990 championship game, Joe went out with a sternum injury and a broken hand, which Joe told me Leonard Marshall literally grabbed and broke on the way down from that fall. And they lost at home to the Giants at the end in the 1990 championship game. And then Ronnie Lott and Roger Craig left via Plan B free agency. And Joe spent almost 2 seasons out with elbow issues, and Steve Young emerged as a passing champion and then an MVP. Joe Montana did come back and play the second half of their meaningless end of the season Monday night game in '92 and played real well. Meaningless because the 49ers had already clinched. And then Steve Young started and lost the game. They were upset in the '92 championship game against the Cowboys, with Joe standing there now active. So very weird situation. They ended up trading Joe, and then in '93, Steve Young, another monster season and another NFC championship game defeat to the Cowboys. And so even then, as great as Steve Young was, an MVP, a passing champion, a guy playing at a very high level, he really hadn't won the crowd. Joe Montana took, in very magical fashion, a franchise that had never been able to win in a city that had never won a professional sports championship and created magic. And he was near and dear to the hearts of fans, and there were very stylistic differences. There were big stylistic differences between him and Steve, and Steve wasn't reading defenses by the book, and he was improvising a lot and running and making things happen in an orthodox fashion. And a lot of tension between them. Joe felt very chafed by what he thought was Steve's kind of like the juxtaposition between his goody two-shoes image and his very intense maneuvering behind the scenes to try to get on the field. And Steve felt real stung by Joe because, he really looked up to him as a legend and felt not supported. And I'm someone who was tight with both of them and, certainly understood it from both perspectives and, was trying not to take sides. And back then, working for the Santa Rosa Press-Democrat, which was not widely circulated in Santa Clara, I was kind of able to straddle the line. But I remember, talking to many, many 49er fans or going on the radio and having people tell me how Steve Young was no good and he just wasn't doing it the right way. And I remember then I'd go to other cities and fans and other people would say, "Oh my God, I love that guy. He's amazing." I'd be like, "Yeah, they don't really like him in the Bay Area." I would kill for that guy. So, but really, then you go to '94 and a lot of pressure, and they had that incredible game very early in '94 where the Niners went to Kansas City, a very surreal game, and Steve Young lost to Joe, got pummeled by Derek Thomas and Neil Smith of the Chiefs, and just, unbelievably tough player, hung tough and won a lot of respect from the Niners the way he hung in there. And Joe played an almost perfect game and won. And then, of course, the year ending with the Niners getting to the Super Bowl, Steve Young eclipsing Joe's record with 6 touchdown passes, winning MVP, and from that point on, finally had won the crowd. So incredible memories with those two, and it was more tense than I think modern-day fans would believe or understand.
We have a clip from Gary Plummer, linebacker for the 49ers. His first season with the team was in 1994. And we asked him, coming over as a free agent that year, how much pressure did that team face to win a Super Bowl in 1994? What was it like in the locker room? And I think you'd be interested in his answer.
One question I did want to ask you is, looking back to 1994, that Super Bowl year, they brought you in. They brought in Ken Norton. They drafted Lee Woodall to really overhaul the linebacker corps. And, of course, you guys won the Super Bowl. Now, it seemed from the outside looking in that there was a lot of pressure on the team that season with the losses to the Cowboys. And I know it was your first year with the team, but did you feel that pressure in the locker room? Or was it something that you guys just took week to week and didn't worry about that?
Oh my gosh, it was unbelievable. I can remember like it was yesterday, thinking this is what it means to practice like a champion, to play like a champion. The pressure to succeed was unparalleled, and it wasn't a secret. It was either we win the Super Bowl this year or we're all a bunch of failures. And it was a little bit scary. It's one of those be careful what you wish for things, because when it comes true, you might not really want to be there. So I was the first guy that they signed, and so then Kenny Norton was the second guy. And when that happened, it was instant relief for me, because they were basically saying, you're going to turn our defense around. And I'm like, well, I'm a pretty confident guy, but I'm not sure I can make a team go from the second worst defense in the NFL to Super Bowl caliber. So it was a great bond early on for Kenny Norton and I. And then, of course, the signings that happened after that, Deion Sanders, and it was fun. It was a ton of pressure, but you thrive under that pressure if that's in your character. And all the guys that they did sign were truly those kind of players. And then, when you have a guy like Eddie DeBartolo, making sure, and most teams do this now, but at the time they didn't, making sure that it was a wide body jet, that every player had 3 seats, and making sure that every player had his own room. I mean, with the Chargers, we were on the road and we had to room with another player that's snoring or, staying up late or whatever. So it was remarkable. It really was. Just the way you were treated was phenomenal. And then, when we did start winning, you would show up to an away game at the hotel, and the entire hotel would be roped off. And it reminded me of like rock stars, because security was unbelievable. And I mean, hundreds and hundreds of fans just lining up, trying to get into the hotel and just get a piece of somebody, and, screaming names out. It was completely foreign to a guy that had labored in anonymity in San Diego for most of his 8-year career.
It's the most anticipated WNBA season in history.
So you know what that means.
Court is back in session with Queens of the Court, a WNBA podcast.
I'm your girl, Cheryl Swoops.
And I'm Jordan Robinson. All WNBA season long, we'll bring you interviews with star athletes, analysis on your favorite teams,
and lots of hot takes.
Order in the court.
Follow and listen to Queens of the Court, free on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Dexter Carter is another clip that we have. That's always been, and probably to this day still is, not one of my favorite interviews, the favorite interview that we did here. Dexter was so open and honest about so many things about his career in the 49ers. And the clip that we have here is Dexter talking about the real reason Charles Haley was traded, and some stuff about Bill Romanowski and him. They had a feud, they didn't get along, and Dexter gets into what really happened there.
But I'm happy that I had a great experience with Joe and Steve and that entire team that I played with. There's only 2 guys that, you can ask me this question later, and I'm trying to give you a little filler here. There's only 2 guys that, I had issues with there. Every other person was a blast to work with. I'm talking about from the front office to the players. But, and one guy was worse than the other. But, if you want to hear about that, you can ask me about it, and I'll tell you.
Well, we got to follow up with that, right? yeah. So, who was it? Who were those guys, Dexter, that you were maybe weren't so great teammates at the time?
Okay, well, from a professional perspective, we had to be great teammates, but they made it very, very difficult. I'm gonna tell you the one that made at least that wasn't the worst. He was the second. He was second in line, and a great player has more Super Bowl rings than anybody.
I know what you're gonna say.
But at least we know now why he was the way he was. But Charles Haley didn't care who you were. He didn't care if you were a rookie, and he didn't care if you were Joe Montana. He would give it to you. Verbally, he would, if he wasn't picking on you, you were happy he didn't, and you would think it was funny. I saw him get on Joe Montana. Joe was very good at ignoring him, though.
Mm-hmm.
But there was one guy that nobody messed with, and Charles didn't even mess with him. And when he messed with him, 2 weeks later, he was gone. And when I say gone, he was given away to Dallas.
Right.
Our best defensive player, and he was given away to Dallas, who at the end of the day, helped take 3 rings off of my fingers. I could have had 3 more Super Bowl rings, but Charles Haley was, oh my goodness, he was like that when he was 15 years old. But now, all these years later, we find out why he was that way. Because he would come to work some days, and he literally, it looked like he didn't get any sleep. He wouldn't say a thing to you, to nobody. And come to find out, he was taking Ritalin. Because back then, they had diagnosed him with hyperactivity. But now, 25 plus years later, that diagnosis, which they didn't know back then, was bipolar. And now they've got it under control. I see him every year at the DeBartolo Family Foundation event in Tampa, and he's still the laughable Charles Haley, have a good time. But I am so happy for him that they've got that under control, because it was bad. It was bad. But the day that he went at Jerry Rice and Jerry went back at him, what transpired in that locker room that morning led to 2 weeks later, the 49ers literally giving Charles away to their toughest competitor.
Wow.
So that kind of tells you, oh my God, what did he do? There's a little bit more to that story that I can't share on the air, but nonetheless, it's a true story. Anybody who may hear what I say, it's nothing negative. It's not saying anything bad about the 49er organization. It's not saying anything bad about Charles. It's just saying that, we gave literally the best NFL defensive player away to our toughest competitor because he messed with the wrong guy. Now I'm sure Jerry and Steve they're okay today. But I'm sorry, Jerry and Charles are okay today, but back then you couldn't mess with Jerry. Now to get to the guy that I really have no love for today, and I say that because here we are, 90, 2000, 2010. We're talking about almost 28 years later. And I was looking at ESPN, and what's the radio show of one of the top?
Mike and Mike?
Not Mike and Mike. He's a single, he and a girl.
Oh, was it Colin Cowherd?
Yes, that one, The Herd.
Yeah.
My brother calls me and he says, "Hey, Dexter, hey, man, look at this." He sent me, and I'm like, are you serious? This guy is still talking about this after almost 30 years? Oh. So, let me tell you what happened. The guy is Bill Romanowski.
I'm not shocked at all. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
Exactly. Now, Bill Romanowski everybody understands the dude was a step ahead of the NFL when it came to steroids.
Mm-hmm.
So we can make excuses and say, hey, he was like that because, you know how they say that makes you angry, makes you do things. Well, I do believe that, but there were a few other guys on the 49ers that did steroids too, and they weren't like that. Now, every training camp, you know, the 49ers, and during the season, we never practiced in pads. You know, we never practiced in pads. But during training camp, for about 2 weeks, we practiced in pads and we hit. Every single training camp I was in with Bill Romanowski, I was voted at least 4 years. I was the best blocking back because one, I was squatting 600 and some pounds in high school. So that's where my strength came from. So as a small back, I understood leverage and balance. Now, would a big guy run over me eventually? Yes, but the quarterback only needs about 2.5 seconds, you know, and he needs to step up or step out of the pocket. Well, in training camp, when we would block each other, he would always pick a fight with me every training camp.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it never rolled over into the season until 1994. You're going to think this story is funny. And the first I heard about this story after my time was done with the 49ers was 2007. And I'm coaching the running backs at Florida State, and one of my players come in, and he's got Bill Romanowski's book. And he says, hey, Coach, hey, what's up with this right here? And I'm like, what are you talking about? He says, man, Bill Romanowski tells this story about you and him getting in a fight in the locker room, and he threw a microwave at you.
What?
And yes. Oh, not only that, but he choked me.
Oh, my gosh.
Exactly. Now, I've seen Bill Romanowski twice since then. I saw him at a DeBartolo event, and I totally pretended I didn't know anything about it because I'm not the confrontational one, right? Then the second time was at the Hall of Fame last year or 2 years ago when Mr. D got inducted into the Hall of Fame. We were at the his Hall of Fame party, and I totally ignored him the whole night. The third time was at the DeBartolo event this year, and this was the first time after the ESPN interview he was on. Now, that time it really bothered me because I'm like, we're talking about 30 years later, and this dude is still telling this lie. And this is what he said. Now, I'm going to tell you what happened, but I'm going to also tell you what he said at the same time. In our lounge, back then we had one microwave. 3 people usually use it at the same time. You know, you could put 3 sandwiches in there and it works. Well, we've done it always. Well, this one day, I walk in there, you know, guys are in the lounge, you know, chilling, watching TV, and I open it up, and there's another sandwich in there. I don't know whose it is. I just put mine in there, and as usual, we reset it and turn it on. So Bill looks at me. I look to my left, and Bill says, hey, what are you doing? And I said, I'm putting my sandwich in the microwave. He said, well, I don't want it in there with mine. So he opens it up, takes it out. Well, I open it up, and I put it back in. Now, before I could let go of the handle with my left hand, Bill is to my left. There's 2 round tables. There's round tables all around us, and 2 behind me or to the side of me, and a wall. So Bill, when I put it back in there, before I could close it, Bill does attack me. Now, that is true. He does, you know, he's about, 6'4"? I'm 5'9". So he does get me around the neck area, but it's a push. It's an attack. So immediately I fall back on a round table. Okay. As I fall back, the microwave door comes off in my hand. By the time I fall back, there's other players already intervening, breaking it up. So, you know what I'm saying? So it's not really, it's a big deal, but there's no advantage at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But when they pull him off of me, I'm pissed off because my father, my late father, name is Levy Carter, and you don't mess with Levy Carter, okay? So a little Levy came out in me. So I threw the microwave door at him, and I tried to get a chair and throw at him, but the guys grabbed me. So there was no microwave thrown at anybody, and it was literally stopped. Well, within 5 minutes, it gets up to George Seifert, and George Seifert calls us up to his office. Now, this is what happened during the fight, okay? He didn't want my sandwich in there. I put it back in there. He did attack me. As he pushed me back on the table, it was aggressive. He broke a gold chain that I had, you know. Now, he didn't necessarily choke me, but his hands were around my throat area, but it was broken up. We go up to George Seifert, and George, this is what George says to Bill. He says, Bill, what is your problem? He said, you always seem to have an issue with Dexter in training camp, but this is the first time it's ever come off the field. You know, so George even noticed what the issue was. He said, you know what? It stops here. We're not going to do this again. And it never, ever happened again. The issue with Bill is this. Bill is going around the country still after 30 years telling people, one, by the way, go on YouTube. If you look up Dexter Carter, it comes up. And Bill is on there literally about 5 months ago telling the story, saying that he threw a microwave at me and he picked me up and choked me up against a wall, is what he's saying. So the story kind of has been fantasized since back in the day. But this is what he said on the herd that really pissed me off. Anybody who played with the 49ers, anybody who knows how the 49ers practice, know that during the season, we never practice in pads, which means you don't tackle. You don't do any of that. The reason it came up on the herd is because he said evidently two teammates must have gotten into it in practice. And he said, hey, how is it to get over something when you've had an issue with a teammate? And he said, oh, no. When it comes to players, we're boys. You know, hey, we fight, then we get over it and we move on. He said, one day, I threw a microwave at Dexter Carter and picked him up and choked him. And you know what? I went out to practice that day, and I had 3 sacks. I had 2 interceptions. Hey, didn't bother me. You know, like it was a joke. And right there he's lying because, one, how could he have sacks when we don't even practice in pads? He could have had a couple of interceptions, but I doubt it. So I hope he hears this show because I got a lot of love for him. You know, but that's he is the only one of the 49ers to me that, one, just was a jerk. But it's interesting that if you go and Google Bill Romanowski or you ask anybody about him, the feelings I'm sharing is no different. Right. The dude has issues. He has issues. But nonetheless, I'm a happy 49er for life, and I love what we did this past week. I'm glad we got a win, and hopefully we can talk just a little bit even about that because that's more important. But nonetheless, hey, Dexter Carter is a 49er, and you wanted to know about me a little bit here going in, in my future and about my experiences, and I wanted to share a little bit of it with you.
Man, that was so good. I mean, I don't know how we can follow that up. I mean, like, do I even want to ask like the rest of the questions, man? I mean, Dexter, that was so good. Like, man, that was awesome. But we do have to, as you said, we do have to talk about what happened this past week. And the 49ers got their first win. The first win for Kyle Shanahan, first win for John Lynch, first win for CJ Beathard. And I kind of want to talk about the running backs because obviously that's kind of your area of expertise. And with some of the injuries that the 49ers have had, it's been kind of tough to get a read on some guys, especially along the offensive line. It's kind of tough to get a read on the running backs. Do you feel like they should extend Carlos Hyde, or does paying a running back maybe not make sense considering Shanahan's system is so running back friendly?
You know what? It's running back friendly, but I think you need a good running back. If you look at Atlanta, they had two good running backs, Coleman and Devontae Freeman. So you need two good running backs. And I'm going to tell you, I like Matt Breida. I mean, he's a heck of a receiver out of the backfield and, you know, was a very productive back at Georgia Southern. So I think, you know, Matt Breida is going to be very, very valuable to the 49ers moving forward. And I think Carlos Hyde, now the one thing that I worried about Carlos Hyde moving forward, and I hadn't decided whether it would be, you know, relevant or very important to bring him back, but I think he's a good back. I wanted to see him with that offensive line being suspect in the way that it's been. I wanted to see him be productive without that, because there are times when you got to do it yourself. You've got to be able to be productive and, you know, and gain 4 yards a carry. I hadn't seen that in him yet. Now, I do know the offensive line has had its issues. So I do like him, and I think the 49ers have two backs that they can move forward in the future. I'm not giving up on Carlos Hyde yet. He's needed to stay healthy, and if he stays healthy, I think he can be productive. Now, this game, I was very impressed. Now, Joe Stanley coming back really must have inspired that offensive line, because they were probably the most productive they've been all season. And Carlos Hyde, you know, had a productive game. So I'm not going to throw Carlos Hyde out to the wolves right now. I think he's a good back, and I think we just need to shore up that offensive line and help get Joe Stanley some help. And, you know, I think we brought in our son, who I think is a good receiver. You know, hope to get him back and healthy. But if you can continue to develop the young wide receivers you have and get a good, you know, maybe, you know, you can find some good receivers that don't necessarily have to come in the first and second round. You can find some good receivers, some good players in general, third round on down.
Finally, Joe Starkey, legendary announcer. We interviewed him back in 2017, and we were lucky enough to. He told a story about Eddie DeBartolo, not only his impact on the field, but his impact off the field, what Eddie D meant to people, and also some of his favorite calls of all time. That was another one of those interviews where it was like, wow, we're talking to Joe Starkey. It was really cool. We had just started the show at that point. All these interviews actually were from 2017. So it was from the first year we did the show way back then, and still getting to know a lot of the guys. Now that we know, like Mike's been on the show a few times, but back then it was new. And a lot of these guys, it was the first time talking to them, and we were building relationships, and it was cool to kind of be able to talk to them and get these stories.
It's interesting. We've had a lot of former players on, and it seems at some point, whether we bring it up or not, Eddie DeBartolo always gets brought up. And the fact that he takes care of his players and his staff, and he treated them like family. And I'm curious to hear what your relationship was like with Mr. DeBartolo, and maybe some stories you could share about him.
Eddie DeBartolo was the most unique owner in all of sports that I've ever seen. Comparing, for example, having worked for Charlie Finley for a while, who was one of the great jackasses of all times. When suddenly you work for a man like he was horrible. I mean, he didn't like anybody. He was dogmatic, autocratic, didn't get along with people. So help me God, this is true. At one point, his entire front office for the Seals hockey team was 7 people. That was it.
Wow.
And he had little more than that, believe it or not, with the A's. When he owned the A's, he didn't do it. So he was not exactly a magnanimous spirit. Eddie was just the opposite. Eddie couldn't do enough for anybody who had anything to do with the team. And even to this day, his legend goes on in what he will do for, there have been players who have suffered cancer, who have had terrible illnesses, who've had family tragedies. If he finds out about it, and he makes sure he finds out about it, by the way, most of the time, he will step in dramatically. We had a good friend of mine who was a 49er PR person for a long time named Dave Ron. Dave got cancer, and he wasn't even 50 years of age. And Eddie literally sent him all over the country in his private plane to see if they could find some place to treat him to get him the best cancer treatment. That's what he would do for people.
Wow.
He is one of the most unique people I've ever known.
Wow, and you're not the first person to say that. I feel like so many people have so many fond memories of Eddie DeBartolo, and he's impacted so many lives beyond football. And he just seemed like a really, really great guy, and it seemed like the 49ers were a family at that time.
Yes, and I mean, you really were a family. I can remember he said to me once, at that point I'd been working for him for maybe 3 years, and we were at a party together, and my wife and I were talking to Eddie, and he turned to my wife and looked at me and said, "I want you to know, as long as I own this team, he's my announcer."
Wow.
So that's the kind of person he was, you know. He had that kind of character.
Wow, it's just, yeah, the guy obviously bringing the fans, he brought us 5 Super Bowl championships, and I just can't say enough about the guy, what he's done for us fans, and it's always really cool to hear from people that work with him on a day-to-day basis.
And for example, right now, you know, it just goes without saying that anything that Dwight Clark needs or anything that might help Dwight Clark, Eddie is absolutely on top of it.
It's great to hear.
Whether it was the 49ers or Cal, you've had a lot of famous calls. We talked about the Garrison Hurst run, and you've called 2 Super Bowls, and obviously you called the big game band on the field play. What were some of your favorite calls of all time?
Well, if it's football, then I loved Terrell Owens, maybe my single favorite 49er call, because it was almost unexpected. I mean, Owens was a young player then. He wasn't playing very well. He couldn't hang on to the ball. He had a lot of drops in that particular game. The Packers owned Steve Young and the 49ers in that era. We just couldn't beat him. Mm-hmm. And so here out of nowhere, we win this game in the opening rounds of the playoffs against the Packers. By the way, for a team that really should have gone all the way to the Super Bowl. It was a Garrison Hurst year where he got hurt, and I really thought it was a great 49er team that should have got there. But that was certainly one of the great moments. Just being part of broadcasting some of those games. I mean, I was the third man in the booth when Lon had the great call against Cincinnati in the Super Bowl when the pass to Taylor that won that game. So there were a lot of great 49er moments, unexpected wins at the last moment of the game, in Montana throwing a last-second pass, Young doing something dramatic, Jerry Rice there for his great world record-setting catches. So it was really special. And if you take it outside the football realm, though, one of the things that I probably remember as much as anything I've ever done was the Lake Placid Olympics. I had been in the NHL for 7 years and had just left the NHL to come back to San Francisco to work at KGO Radio. And ABC had the rights to the Olympics, so I went up to Lake Placid and I covered every hockey game. And I actually broadcast the final period of the U.S.-Russia game. That was as memorable a moment as I've ever had in sports, almost beyond anything else.
Thanks again to Mike Silver, Gary Plummer, Dexter Carter, and Joe Starkey for joining us over the years. Thanks to all of you for listening. Please subscribe to the 49ers Webzone YouTube page, as well as our podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, everybody. Happy 4th.
9-0-3. 1, 2, 3.
.2400 Sports is an Odyssey company.